You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to the writingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello and welcome to this very special episode of Friday's Writing Community Chat Show. And here is the next bit. Hello to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Writing Community Chat Show on a Friday evening. Thank you for joining us. If you're listening back on the podcast or you're watching this back, again, thank you. Your support is much appreciated. We're available on all podcast platforms. So wherever you get your podcasts, you can have our show in your ears. And visually, obviously you can watch us on YouTube and you can watch us on various TikTok bits and stuff as well. But tonight we have another great guest with us. So please stick around. Obviously you may be able to see his book there in the top corner, Into the Dark. So we're going to get into all of that good stuff. And we're also going to chat about writing. So if you're into writing or you're looking to start writing a novel, then interviews like this can be hugely insightful. And yeah, hello to Agate, who's not well and who's not with us, but he's typing in the comments. So have us in your face on YouTube. Yeah, that can happen as well. And yeah, the book looks great. And you said so. People are very excited already to chat about tonight's guest and their book. So I'm going to stop waffling. I will say one more thing, actually. I'm going to say well done to those of you who are almost at dry January and at the end of it. Because we know writers tend to coincide with alcohol. If the Harrogate Crime Writers Festival is anything to go by. But if you've been doing Dry January, well done to you. And hello to people watching in the chat. So, tonight's guest, I'm just going to read this. Ørjan Karlsson grew up in Bodø. And I'm going to butcher some of these names. I think I am. But I know they're a football team. So maybe we could get into that because they've got a very successful football team at the moment. A town north of the Arctic Circle. Wow, must be cold. We were talking to our American listeners in the chat and it's minus 17 there. So we might chat about the weather as well. But he holds a master's degree in sociology and received officer training in the army. Okay, so he's been in the army just like Chris Agate. Shame he's missed this interview because they could have chatted about all things army. He has participated in international missions for the EU, and the UN, and NATO. And he's worked for the Norwegian Ministry of Defence, very much like the Norwegian James Bond. And the decorative for civil protection. So, Ørjan has written a large number of thrillers, sci-fi novels, and crime novels for adults, including the acclaimed thriller series featuring Major Frank Halvorsen and Lieutenant Ida Vertel of the Norwegian Special Forces, which is Into Thin Air. His 16th novel began the Jacob Webber series and was first published in England to much acclaim in 2024. And then it has his socials, but I'm going to let him share his socials later on in the show. So without further ado, Ørjan Karlsson.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Hello, thank you very much for joining us. Again, apologies if I butchered any of those pronunciations in the intro. But yeah, one of the first questions that we like to ask on the show is, what's the writing scene like where you are? Do you get involved in it? Have you got any little circles or, what's your routine like?
Yeah. As you mentioned earlier, I'm from Bodø, north of the Arctic Circle, but currently I'm living in Oslo, the capital of Norway. And the writing circle here is quite good. All the major publishing houses, or most of them at least, are present here in the capital. And there are a lot of, during spring and autumn, you can basically go to a book launch every day, at least on weekdays. And especially the crime writers here, they have their own milieu. We meet sometimes once a month, and also with other writers, or fiction writers or whatever. So I would say it's very good. It's basically up to you to get engaged, because there's always something going on.
Brilliant. Yeah, we love that. Obviously, myself and Chris have been to quite a few festivals and gatherings of crime writers. What's your experience of crime writers been like? Obviously, meeting them face to face, because they get a lot of the darkness out on the page, but they're normally very friendly people.
Yeah, they are. They are extremely friendly people, actually. And I had the pleasure last year to go to both Aberdeen and Newcastle Noir in the UK as well. And I mean, it's the same. We, as you said, we tend to get all that kind of dark stuff out on our pages, and then we just, go in and have a good time. But obviously, at certain point during the evening or night, you start to talk shop. You have all these kind of interesting discussions, and you probably remember about half of them when you wake up the next day. Then you do it again if there is a festival for 2 or 3 days, like the Oslo Crime Fest, which is now in March, where I also think that the McDermott also is coming. So it's quite a big deal for us. So no, it's good. And it's been actually, even though we have all this talk about people reading less, last year was good here in Norway, and also listening to audiobooks is way up. So right now it's actually quite good being a writer in Norway.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Lots of people in the comments saying things already. So Oslo is a great city. Greetings to you, Halo, as well. People getting involved. Chris says embrace the darkness, and we will definitely do that, obviously, with the conversation that we're having today. But first then, if you could take us back to when you decided that writing was going to be something in your life.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a cliche, but I read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings when I was really, really young, and I probably didn't understand half of it. But even then, I realized it was this kind of really amazing experience. And afterwards, I desperately wanted either to be Gandalf or a writer. And at age 12, I tried to be Gandalf, and I even, stole some of my father's tobacco. And, that went really bad. So I decided on the writing option instead. So me and a friend, we were also very, how can you say, we were very thrilled and excited about a Norwegian science fiction writer. And he wrote for children, but, in a way that also felt you felt like a bit of an adult when you read his book. So it was pretty cool. And we decided to try and do something like that. And basically, we copied the main character's name and basically all his environment as well. But we only had one of these kind of plot devices. So at the end of each chapter, this guy got hit in the head and everything went dark. And I think in our book, that went on for like 13 or 14 chapters. And we were 12 at the time. So when we had written this, for us at least, what we call a book, we sent it to this kind of book bindery in Bodø, because basically we thought that's where they make books. And this is where I think the story, for me at least, has this kind of distinct importance. The head of this company, he sat down and he handwritten us a letter thanking us for sending the book and described what he liked. So we had obviously at least believed through it. And for me, at least, that this adult guy took an interest in us and just gave us a feedback, made me at that point in my life, at least, to believe that it was possible. And of course, a lot of stops and starts and rejections from different publishing houses until I found my voice. But that's basically the first effort, at least, to try and write something that was just my own, together with my friend, of course.
Yeah, again, people in the chats are saying Gandalf is an excellent goal. Yeah, that really did make me laugh. That
not so much.
Yeah, the trying of the tobacco. That's brilliant. So obviously, then, very young age, start sending writing off, and you get that feedback. And obviously, it's great to receive the feedback. But how did you sort of take the building blocks to get to almost where you are now, in terms of taking on some of those rejections, coming up with new ideas, crafting new things? Can you explain a little bit about what that journey was like?
Yeah, I actually have to segue to role-playing games. We discovered a game called Middle-earth Role-Playing pretty early. I think that was the first effort to make this kind of Lord of the Rings universe. And I started as a player, and then I decided I wanted to be a games master. And you buy these modules and you read them, and then you play the story with the other players. But after a while, I started writing my own stories. And eventually, and this was 3 or 4 years after we started playing, I didn't need to write the stories down anymore. I had the story, I had all the non-player characters, the treasure, the dangers, whatever they were going to do in my head. So I could just sit down and I could basically tell the story and take into account what they were doing, and then, revise the story I had going. And in hindsight, I think that was, for me at least, it became this kind of, if not superpower, at least a way for me to express myself intuitively. So if you would ask this kind of classical question, if I'm a structured or an intuitive writer, I'm pretty far on the intuitive branch of it. And I think that came as a part of me being this games master in this kind of fantasy gaming world for many years. And then in my 20s, I wanted to write proper fiction. And that was quite bombastic, and I really tried too hard. But I was still, looking for my voice. And I was searching for my voice, but I remember I got one of these rejections where they say more than just thank you, but no, like 2 pages where the consultant, pretty clearly said, these are the strong points, these are the weak points. And at the end of this letter, the person wrote that you should find something that you are interested in your personal life, or something that you know more about than maybe others. Because if you try to write this kind of classical fiction, your voice will not be the one that they recognize. At least it's not strong enough yet. So then at the time, I had just finished the military and my sociology, and I was working at the Ministry of Defense. And I was sitting in the office of the Minister of Defense. At the time, we were sending special forces to Afghanistan after 9/11. And it struck me, this I know a lot about, and a lot was going on behind the scenes. I've been a military guy myself, an officer. So why not try and write about that? And that was what became the first book in the Frank Halvorsen series. And that got me started on the thrillers. So that's basically the inception point. That was 2004.
So obviously before 2004, you're still staying creative, which I think is going to be the main sort of takeaway from this, in terms of you were, playing the role-playing games, you being a story master there. How did your life change then, from obviously going sociology degree, working in the army, then the Ministry of Defense? These are all really difficult roles to sort of take up in society, and I should imagine took up a lot of your time. So how did you navigate that with then transitioning into being a writer?
I discussed this a lot with colleagues as well. And what I find out, and you're perfectly right, I mean, the working day starts early and it ends late. And what I did then was that I basically got out of bed at 5 in the morning. And then I had this 1.5 hour entirely to myself. And at least the way it is for me, my head is most clear in the mornings, and then it gets a bit, muddy and not too creative at the evenings. The evenings I sometimes use for revising what I did in the mornings, basically, but not writing anything new. So to begin with, that was pretty hard, but I really wanted to really wanted to be a writer, and wanted to tell my story, or at least a story that eventually progressed into a book. But the strange thing is that after 4 or 5 months, I didn't even know I needed to set my time, and I would set it to set my alarm. I woke up, I did this, and I went to work, and it felt quite fulfilling actually, because when I went to work, I didn't think about my book at all. But when I was writing or trying to write, I was really occupied with just that. So I was able to compartmentalize the writing part from my, call it, professional daily life. And I think that helped me, because when I talk to young writers now, they really struggle how to fit in their writing part with everything else that's going on, if it's family or work or whatever, because it takes a lot of time and effort if you're not super lucky before you can outright live just by writing.
Yeah, I think one of the things I was going to ask there, in terms of with that first book, and again, we have a lot of guests come on the show, and I'm always interested about this. That first book, there's not as much pressure, because obviously you're writing it, you're enjoying the process. You're saying you're getting up at 5 a.m. and it feels good, and it feels like you've got a sense of achievement. How does that change then when book one comes out, and then the pressure comes from, oh yeah, we'd like a book two, please?
Yeah. The second book syndrome is real, obviously. The publishing houses, even though they know about this, and your editor or whoever, they want something right away. Yeah, we have to have a book next year, because now people are interested and they know who you are. And you yourself as a writer, you tend to under communicate how much time you spent on the first one, because you so desperately want to satisfy your publishing house or your writer or your editor, I mean. And so you try to force it. I think a lot of writers, young writers, really regret when they have a few more books under their belt, that they didn't have this sit down with their editor and say, I actually need 2 years on this one, or maybe longer, because I'm not sure how it will turn out. And so for me it was the same, but I have to say that my third book was the worst. I remember it as it was yesterday. I had just I've written, I think, 90% that I sent it to my editor, and she read it and said, come down and we can have a chat about it. And the first thing she told me was, Ørjan, you could start another novel. That would be okay. And that's really not the first words or first sentence you want to hear from your editor. I think 85% of the book needed to be at least revised. And some of the mistakes I made, or I actually knew it subconsciously, but I just ignored it to finish the book. So what I did was that I spent the next 6 months, instead of writing a new one, I revised the old one. And I think that was like this kind of Protestant ethic idea of, punishing yourself a bit so you learn it. And it turned out okay in the end. But book 2 and 3 were really a struggle when it came to, finding an idea that you believed it and follow it through. Because at least for me, when I write, opportunities tend to pop up on the way. And then I sometimes, follow that lead or that lead. And especially when I was just starting out, my analysis of these ideas were not always that sound. So I ended up, maybe wasting 14 days or a month in one direction, and just had to, cut that away and start anew. But that's probably the downside of being an intuitive writer. Sometimes when the structure isn't, in your head in a way, you can lose your way, and it will cost you time, and it can be quite agonizing as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the questions I was going to ask you, just when you were talking there, that sort of popped up, was how do you know that the idea for the book that you've got, obviously with you being intuitive as well and kind of going with the idea, how do you know that idea is worth writing an entire book about, and it's not just a short story or an idea that you can sort of tease out?
I I remember Stephen King was interviewed once, or at least he referred to it, and he said that the most common question I get is, where do you get all your ideas from? And I think he answered something like, I can't really imagine how it is not to having these ideas, these in your head all the time. And for me, at least so far, that has been, I think, I've been fortunate to have it that way. There is always something I could think of that I would like to write. What I learned eventually was that if new ideas pop up all the time and you get really excited at once, and instead of then rushing to your computer or pen and paper, you just let it rest there for a while. And I've told myself that if I'm still excited, if I go back and look at the few notes I've jotted down like 3 or 4 weeks later, it's something there. If not, for me at least, it's more like this kind of flash, and maybe that kind of flash I can insert sometime in the story that I decide to write. But I let it rest for a while. But I have to, jot down a few key points or signifiers so that I remember it. I don't know how it is with the listeners here, but I've had these. I like sometimes to go for runs, and it clears my head. And when I'm running, I sometimes get what I think at least are these brilliant ideas, and I think that I will not forget this one when I get back home, and of course I do, which is slightly frustrating. But I think it's basically the same process as what I just described. But I let them rest.
Yeah. And with the actual writing of a book, then, like, do you write the chapter with the idea that you've let rest for a bit, or do you try and structure it from start to finish, or are you happy to hop around?
I am. I tend to begin at the beginning, and at least I write chapter for chapter until at least the middle. So when I start writing, I know this how it starts, like this kind of surprising start, hopefully, and you get sucked into the story. And I know more or less the middle point, where sometimes you turn it 180 degrees around, and things are not what you thought they were, or something. There is some kind of reveal. And then I know the ending. And even though the ending can change as I write, the main point at the end of the book will always stay the same. It's basically how you structure it at the end that might change. So if I'm at the midway point, I will write then the ending the way I see it, the 3 or 4 last chapters. And then I will use that as kind of a steering point for the rest of the text, so that I know that when I get there, it will be coherent. It will make sense. So that's basically the way I do it. I remember the first and second book. I was writing this kind of short chapter notes, like chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I started filling them out. And I couldn't do it. It was like something in me resisted actually following the kind of setups that I made myself. So I like the Jakob Weber series that Into the Dark is book 2 of. There is this kind of history arch on the first 5 books, so there is this kind of underlying story as well, and then the 5th book will then reveal something new and hopefully, I think, disturbing for some of the readers that have been following the story so far. But my point here is that I haven't written this kind of things down. I have it all in my head. So I jokingly told my editor that in Oslo in wintertime you have these icicles hanging from the roofs, and if you're unlucky you get one in the head during wintertime. And I told her that if that were to happen to me, the entire Jakob Weber universe would be gone, because I have no notes. So hopefully that will not happen.
Yeah. No, I do love that, because obviously it's very creative, and it takes, sometimes when people say, oh, I write a load of notes, and I hate it when people say, oh, I've got a spreadsheet. I'm like, no, it's meant to be a creative process. But yeah, I suppose my question then I was going to ask is, what writing advice do you wish you knew at the beginning of your writing career that you now know?
Yeah. I think number one. I mean, I might have been a bit cocky when I described how I actually ended up being an author and a writer, because you always doubt yourself. The only way you can confirm for yourself that you are a writer and you want to do this is to write, and don't really ignore what other people say, because if you have a job and you have a family or you have commitments, and then you will have 1 hour a day or 2 hours a day, or use weekends to write. People sometimes will tell you, it's nice to have a hobby, but you shouldn't let it impact your the rest of your life, or you shouldn't be so selfish or whatever. But if you really mean this, you have to tell yourself that it matters to me, and if it matters to me and I can find a kind of a work-life balance, it should also matter to the one around me. And you get more confidence eventually. But even though writing, I would say it is my passion, but the best time of the day is the first 2 hours in the morning when I sit down and write. I can't really imagine changing that for anything. It's still work. Everything else when it comes to writing is work. The meetings, the editing, the first, the second, the third draft. You have to treat it like that, and treat it seriously, and take yourself seriously. I think that's my advice for aspiring writers, because you will be disappointed. You will disappoint yourself. You will be disappointed in feedback from others. But you need to really believe in what you're doing, and to take yourself seriously mean that you have to invest time in it. And I think that it's a very general advice, but if you really internalize it, you will see that you will also probably need to change things in your own life. And if you really believe in this, they will probably change for the better.
Yeah, I love that. Brilliant advice. Like you said, it's the best advice is honest advice, and that's true. One final question before we go on to Into the Dark was just going to be about putting together a series. Like, how is it? Is it a different approach to writing just a standalone, or do you have to sort of do a little bit more work in terms of creating a bigger backstory in order to go forward and things like that? Or do you have to sort of like, is the editing process harder because you're trying to get little bits in and sort of grow characters over a series of novels?
I've written a few standalones, and I find them. I mean, if you look at, like a page per page effort, it's harder, because you need to make the reader think that there is this kind of depth in the story from page one, that there is this kind of, you just know that there is more here than meets the eye. So you have to take into account how you present the characters, how you present the environment, and I mean, again, I tend to refer to Stephen King, but I think he is the one that in just 1 or 2 pages, what's at stake, where it is, who the main characters are, the antagonist and the protagonist, basically, as well, at least most of the times. So you're already there, and when you read the text, it seems so easy, but when you try to do it yourself, it's very hard. So I think the standalones in that respect are harder. When it comes to a series like the Jakob Weber series, what you really need to think hard about is, in what way will these characters, I got 4 main characters in the book, how will they change over time? How will their relationships with each other and other sub-characters change? What they experience in the books, how will that impact their lives when you meet them in book 2, 3, or 4? and you need to keep tabs on it in a way, and really understand, or at least try to understand, the psychology of it. So the further you progress in a series, the harder it gets to take all this on board without overloading the reader. I mean, I still think that if you're reading one of my Jakob Weber books, you should be able to pick up book number 9 whenever that comes out and still enjoy it. So there is this kind of way of letting the reader that has been following you all along, that he's in well-known company, and you don't over-explain, but at the same time you have to allow for that a new reader will understand what's going on and who the main characters are pretty quickly. So there is a different approach, but you know, at the end of the day, the story itself is the master, and I mean, even the author dances to the tune of that master. So we just need to take that into account as well. And it sounds, when I'm listening to myself talking, it sounds more difficult than it really is. If you're into the flow of writing, you will also intuitively, I think, feel where the process takes you. So at the end of the day, it's trust the process. And if you go wrong, I mean, you probably have an editor or a friend that can help you and point you back in the right direction.
Yeah, love that. So before we go into part 2 then, I'm just going to play a little video, and when we get back, if you could read us the elevator pitch for Into the Dark. You may have a copy of it, but you may have it on the top of your head. You might be able to give it us, but if you could do that, tell us what it's all about, then we'll go into that part. And also stick around for part 3 when you can ask your questions. There's been questions coming in the chat already, which are great. Just put them in there and I will star them and we'll ask them in part 3. But this is going to be part 2. So it's this bit. What's the story? Love it when your voice breaks on the internet. But if you're ready, could you tell us everything about Into the Dark?
Yeah. Kjerringøy is a peninsula 20 kilometers north of Bodø, a small city north of the Arctic Circle. 3 women, they meet every week during wintertime, and they go ice bathing. On this particular evening, one of these women feel that something in the dark water is touching the bottom of her feet, and something is surfacing slowly but surely. And the stench is really bad, and it is a corpse floating up to the surface in this serene, under the northern lights, harbor where they are doing the ice bathing. And that's the starting point of Into the Dark. At the same time, in the city of Bodø, Chief Investigator Jakob Weber is doing a routine search in a house where a young woman tragically has committed suicide. But Jakob finds a few things that he thinks is off, and he decides to look closer on this. And pretty early, it becomes clear to Jakob that this young woman has something to do with a body that floated up in Kjerringøy, 30 kilometers north of Bodø. And that's basically where this mystery starts. And it takes you to a small community. I mean, like 500-600 souls. They live very close to the sea, the Western Fjord. And you have this amazing mountainous landscape. And I think that, you know, a few pages after, or a few days after Jakob arrives in Kjerringøy, and he has to do something in the woods, he comes to this cabin with this henna red door, and that's where everything turns upside down. So that's basically the crime pitch I can give. And I think that this is still, and I'm about to finish book 5 in the series now, but I think that Into the Dark is the most yeah, it's the darkest ones. It's actually the Norwegian title. I don't think it makes any sense in English, but if I were to translate it directly, it would be The Night Travels Alone. So in a Norwegian translation, that makes semi-sense, but I don't think it does in the English one. So Into the Dark is a good fit.
Yeah, I like The Night Travels Alone. I think that it does have some good connotations to it. Yeah, brilliant. So I suppose then one of the questions is, you talked about Stephen King before and about some of the advice that he gave, but you've got two massive why questions at the start of this book.
Yeah.
What it leads into another why question, but why did you decide to do that?
Well, when it came to researching, or at least I like to go to the places where I want to, I to be there. And even though I grew up in Bodø, I live in Oslo, so I actually in my adult age had to rediscover my home city, which was strange in a way, because I understood that it had changed when I started looking. Before I was blind, of course, I saw the changes, but I didn't reflect on them. So when I went to Kjerringøy, I found it a lot more the way I remembered it as a young man than the city of Bodø, and that intrigued me. And it has something to do with the balance of, it can be so brilliantly beautiful when there is this, when this is the winter time, so it's like dark all the time. We got like 4 weeks when the sun doesn't come up. But if you are lucky and it is a clear sky during night, you will get the northern lights, and you can see the mountains in the distance, because the northern lights are reflecting on the ice and snow on the mountains on the other side of the fjord. And you can just imagine then, going out into this serene, calm harbor, and even though it's freezingly cold, it's also extremely invigorating, bathing in this ice cold water. So you feel both emboldened and, like one with the nature at this particular point. Then to introduce this kind of horror, which basically is, intrigued me. And I don't dabble into the supernatural. Everything has a logical solution at the end, but sometimes, you stretch the boundaries, at least the way that your character sees what's going on. Do they even believe their eyes? So I wanted to make that kind of, create that kind of atmosphere. And I always like the challenge of trying to connect two seemingly not connected cases together in a way that makes sense and is satisfying also for the reader. And in all my books, I also try to give enough hints that it should be possible to understand what's going on before it's revealed. But I must admit, I also make it hard, and that's basically the way I like it. I think it's ruinous if the author likes to hold something back and you understand it halfway through. So that was a long question based on a very short. No, that's a long answer based on a very short question. So
I don't know. No, I think it was great. It was a good one. I suppose off the back of that, then I was going to say. What was my question now that you literally just mentioned? Oh, knowing that the reader's going to be guessing what's going on, does that sort of inspire you to play with them a little bit in terms of going, well, I'm going to give you a little bit, and then I'm going to take it back, and then I'm going to throw in a twist a bit further down the line that you won't see coming? Does it almost become like a game that you said before, obviously being a master? And do you think some of that may have crept into your novel writing in terms of going, I'm going to play with them here?
It's an interesting question. I don't think that, I have some characters in my books that are the kind of narrator that you can't trust. Yeah. But they also know who they can trust. So what I do instead is that in Into the Dark, I think I have seven different points of view. And what I do then is that I balance them and put them up against each other, because people see the same situation differently. And then the reader has to figure out what's right or what's wrong. And the perception, it's, if you are told something that happened, or you saw it from a different point of view, or so it's for me at least, it's interesting, because the main character doesn't have the same amount of information that the reader has. So in that point, in that case, the reader has an advantage, but the reader doesn't know what characters to trust or not, except maybe the 3 or 4 that are the mainstays of the series. But even they will sometimes get affected by past experiences or traumas or something like that. So that's basically the way I like to play it, instead of outright, constructing some kind of, now I say this and now I say that. I think it's better to honestly describe what this and that character sees and experiences, and allowing for that might be different, that might not be the truth, but the character believe it to be.
I suppose one of my other questions is linked to, obviously, the fact that this book has been translated into English. What do you think, somebody who enjoys reading sort of British crime fiction, and I say that in brackets, what do you think they would really enjoy about reading your books if they haven't picked one up yet?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to already been to festivals in the UK. The questions I get is about the setting, the north of the Arctic Circle, the landscape, the terrain, the characters, the midnight sun, or the freezing cold. And in book 3 and 4, I'm also describing the way that some of these old timers perceive the land that they live in, that there is this kind of dark undercurrent there. One of the at least it used to be, and it still is, a danger that there are fishermen there, and I guess that especially you guys can relate to this as well. People disappear on the sea. They still do. It's a dangerous work. So you have this kind of fatalism as well. Nature is what nature is, and sometimes you are just a very, very small piece in this enormous and sometimes brutal landscape. I have this scene where Jakob is standing on the edge of the pier in Bodø, and you have this kind of weather when the horizon, you can't see the horizon because the sky is gray and the ocean is gray, and you can't really see where the ocean stops and the sky starts. And then he imagined this thunderous noise, and he imagined that there is this kind of enormous wave rushing towards him, but he can't really see it because everything is gray. And for me, and that is something that I have been thinking myself sometimes on days like that there is this kind of uncertainty when it comes to the nature up north. The moment you start believing that you are its master, you will be on the losing end. And I try to inject that kind of uncertainty into the story, that there is this kind of other force. So the nature and the terrain and everything that surrounds you become a character in itself. And I think that might be, for some at least, interesting, or it may add an extra layer. And at the end, this is something that people that live there experience. They don't have to be superstitious to believe it. It's just the way they feel that, the place that they live is more or less, guided by these kinds of laws. They are still the laws of nature, but sometimes they are hard to decipher.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer. And you says, I think the Arctic is a perfect setting for such a novel, and the sublime manifests in a literary work. But yeah, no, definitely, I love that. So we're going to play a little video now, and then after this, that is our staple questions and your chance to get in some questions as well. I've already got plenty of questions starred in chat, but if you've got any more questions, please throw them in because I will ask them in the community questions section. So here's the video. Brilliant. So we'll start off with a staple question and then I'll ask some of the questions here. So one of our first staple questions is, if you could take any character from fiction and make that character your own, what would you do with them and who would you choose?
Well, I'm a big fan of Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch series. Really enjoyed it. And I would really like to take old Harry up north and introduce him to Jakob Weber and and see how he handles that, because it's a different kind of how can I say, life up there. But on the other hand, I think that both, even though they're really different, Jakob Weber and Harry Bosch, I think that they have something in common as well. They both speak for the dead or for those that seek justice, and their lives are really all about it, and that also alters the life choices they make because it's so personal for them. So I think that would be a really nice make to introduce this guy from Los Angeles to Bodø and see how that goes.
Yeah, I would love that. I think if the internet gods are listening, I know Michael Connelly's got a few new characters, so maybe spending a bit less time on Bosch, but maybe bringing Bosch and taking him up north might be a really good way of bringing that him back into the forefront. So yeah, make that happen, internet people. Yeah, that'd be great. Love that answer. So we'll get a few of the staple questions, not staple questions, community questions. So Agat's jumping in on a few of these. So into the dark, there is a profound sense of how institutions like the police or the military interact with the rugged, unforgiving landscape of the North. That's not a question, Agat. That is a statement.
Yeah, well, I can say yes, but it's your working environment, and I think that at the end of the day, it's not that much different from being a beat cop in a metropolitan area. I mean, if you send Jakob to London, he will be lost. It's like he will be so out of it, fish out of water, like. So, but you always need to think about this kind of extra dimension. And every year up in Bodø, we have this fisher, this tourist going to the West Fjord to fish. And they rent this really super small boat, and they don't wear life vest, and then they go out on the sea, and the weather is no wind, the sea is calm, and of course that can change in like 2 or 3 minutes. And we try to tell them this, and I mean that's like the things that but you have been living there for so long that you don't really reflect upon it. It's just like a part of how you interpret the environment. And I think that's the same for military and for the police and everyone else living up there, and for you guys in a big city as well.
He does have a part two to his statement. So he does say, how much of your military experience in northern Norway helped you realize that the environment is often more of a dangerous antagonist than the actual villain in the story? I think you're already answering that.
Yeah. So. Well, at least when it came to, I spent almost 5 years in even further north. It's a place called Troms in Setermoen, and you had like -30 if you were really unlucky, and you are out there living in really crappy tents, and your source of warmth are they are puny compared to the freezing temperatures, but you live. That's the point of it. You learn to deal with it, but of course that's a really good experience to have as a writer when you are writing stories from these parts of the world. So I used a lot of my own experience into these stories, but to be fair, if you visit Bodø or anywhere else north of the Arctic Circle, this is for most of the people, this is something that they have internalized anyway, and then you just need to understand that this is knowledge that, if it's not unique for you, at least it's something that is special for you and the way that you live up north. And that's excellent stuff for another.
Yeah, Anya says, question for Ørjan. What is that really cool silhouette art example on your wall? It reminds me of a Nordic supernatural being of some sort. And yes, that is a very interesting painting.
Yeah, it's pretty dark, that one. I don't know if you can see it, but if you get pretty close on it, that was basically stuff of nightmares. And I liked it because it's also open for interpretation. It's made by a Norwegian artist. I think it's like one of a series of 20. So I just saw it and bought it. I didn't reflect too much about it. I hung it on my wall, and when I have guests here, they comment on it, and then they know what it really is, and then they ask me the same question every time: why do you have that on your wall area? But I like it.
Yeah, brilliant. Chris, thank you for this. Chris Platt, what books influenced you when you were starting out? Was there one book that you thought, now that's what I do?
Yeah, it depends on how far back I would like to go. When I was in I always had this idea that I wanted to be this guy who wrote funny fiction, like these funny crime things. Like I love Rivers of London, for instance. I think it's super nice, and I like this casual, nice reading. I wrote. I read when the first time I wrote Martin Amy's Money. I was, laughing almost constantly because it was so good, and I wanted to do that as well. But I think that for me, when I went back to, as I said earlier, I had this idea that if I want to write, I need to write something that I know something about. I also then looked around and saw what other writers in that genre were doing. And you have one Swede called Jan Guillou, who read a series about this Swedish special forces guy, and I read a lot of his books. Understood that this is something that I would like to do. So that was important for me. And also I read a bit of Tom Clancy. I don't like everything he has done, but a few of his books I think are good. And my favorite, ominously enough, is Red Storm Rising, which is basically a book about the Third World War, which in these times it feels a bit too current and a bit depressing. But still, that was important for me because that showed me that you can really set this great, grandiose scene and write exciting fiction. So that was I tried to do in my Special Forces series. But Jakob Weber popped up during COVID, basically. I had actually planned to write another Ida Winterdal book, but it was COVID, so I went to visit my father, who lives on a small island in the middle of Lofoten and Bodø, it's like in the sea. And I landed there, and I was out running, and this island is flat. You can basically see one end, see the entire island if you're standing on a small elevated point. And I started thinking, what happens if I just disappear on my run? How would that happen? How can I just disappear? If I'm in the sea, where would I be? And as we mentioned, like in part one, these kinds of ideas pop up, and then you just, you let them be. But that one followed me. And when I went back to Bodø, I had the same kind of thoughts when I was up running in one of the forest woodland areas. And when I got back home to Oslo, that was how Jakob Weber was basically born, out of these two, did the thing that happens on this island and what happens in Bodø. And I drew a lot from what I would call Nordic Noir, like the series that were written in the 70s and 80s, that are quite, if they are not in urban areas, they are pretty clear about this kind of nature and the way that influences the people that live there, and the harsh conditions and the different seasons and whatever. But of course, I wanted to update it, and slowly but surely, Jakob grew and became quite visible for me. And when I introduced Jakob to Noora, who is his partner, it basically all fell into place. Yeah, it's sometimes, you know, I mean, if it hadn't been COVID, or if I didn't go to Lofoten, we would probably not have been having this discussion. So sometimes, you know, random stuff happens, and for me at least this time it was all for the better.
Yeah, brilliant. Got another question here from Chris. So he says, with the massive success of Norwegian shows like Wisting and upcoming Detective Hull on Netflix, do you feel any pressure to write your books within a TV adaptation in mind?
Well, if not pressure, I would be lying to you if I said that you don't think about it. But I'm not, obviously, I'm not the only Norwegian crime writer writing from things that are happening north of the Arctic Circle, but it's so distinct up there. So you can imagine the scenery and the backdrop. That would be amazing. Also, of course, if you decide to do a lot of filming up there, it would be really costly. But I think that, you know, there is this kind of increased attention again, I think, to certain subgenres of the Nordic Noir. I mean, this goes in waves. So I'm hoping that it will, you know, get some attention, especially now that, I mean, the last two books has made Jakob a mainstay, at least in Norway, and now as in the UK and the Netherlands, and this year in Germany, and also Denmark and Sweden recently bought the rights. But it's very easy to get sidetracked by these kinds of, you know, you really want this to happen. The only thing I can do is continue writing the books that I would like to write. And if it happens, it's great. And if not, I'm still having a really good time.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you said, thanks. This was about the painter with the art comment. So she said she's an art historian, so loves discovering new content. So that's cool. Yeah, I suppose I'll ask a couple more questions before we go, because we're nearly at the hour mark. But one of the questions I was going to ask is, with this being a series, do you have a set number of novels in mind, or are you just going to go with the flow, so to speak, and then when it ends, it'll be as much as a surprise to you as it is to everybody else?
Well, when I pitched it to my publishing house, I had an idea of 10 books.
Nice.
And I even had some, I think I even had titles for them all, and only the first one has so far survived. But I had this idea, and I think that the important thing about having this idea about 10 books is that you start immediately thinking about the relationships between the characters over this long arc. And working now on book 5, I'm in this kind of mode now, that when I think that as long as I get new ideas and they feel fresh, I will continue to write. And if that ends in book 9 or book 15, for me that is not that important. I just need to really want to sit down and write another book in this series. What we did last year was that in book 1, we have this flashback to when Jakob is a really young police, and he's working in this small municipality for, I think, 1,200 people, in a municipality outside Bodø. And we decided to try and see, can we also do something about the young Jakob Weber? So the first, and then we decided to this is something that has been written directly for audio. So the first book is coming out now this Easter. So now you can then follow how Jakob became the chief inspector and investigator in Norland, or where he works. And some of the other characters will also then pop up there, and you will get their backstory as well. And I found that immensely satisfying, because I was then able to create this kind of mythology and then, expand on it. And in turn, that gives me a greater depth when I'm writing the main series books. And this is a kind of world building that you actually can trace back again to what I did when I was doing role-playing games. So right now, I'm immensely enjoying myself, but I think I will soon approach the point when I actually have to write stuff down to remember
it. Yeah, love that. So before we go then, where can people stalk you on social media? Where can they buy your books and all that good stuff?
Yeah, well, it's Orenda Books in the UK, and they should be available wherever books are sold. And if not, they are available on Amazon and on Kindle and on Audible. And so it's, or you can just order them directly from Orenda. So that's good. If some of the listeners are going to bloody Scotland in the autumn, they can meet me there, because I was just invited, which I think it's really, I'm looking forward to that. And I am on Facebook, and you will also find my webpage. Just search on with Ørjan Karlsson. I will pop up, and there will be news and competitions and stuff there as well. And everything about upcoming English translations. So I should be pretty easy to find on social media.
Brilliant. And then just before we go, I always like to do this, but can you recommend 1, 2, or 3 authors that you think don't get enough attention that people should be reading?
Yeah, definitely. I was so fortunate that one of the one of the problems, obviously, is I don't know if they're translated into English. Let me think now. I was actually about to show one of these books, but this is in Norwegian. So if I don't have any Norwegian listeners here, Aina Skolan, which I would heartily recommend, she needs to be translated into English. But books that don't get enough attention. Well, this is not a crime podcast or series. This is like for all writing. So I would recommend heartily my good colleague Siri Pettersen. She is, at least in Norway, she is the queen of the new fantasy genre, and her books has been translated into English. And has gotten really good reviews. So if you're looking for fresh, new fantasy, look up Siri Pettersen. I heartily recommend her. She is a really brilliant author, and everything from maps to the picture on the covers to the design inside the book is done by her as well. So that's one shout out, at least, I can give from a Norwegian author. And of course, then you have Gunnar Staalesen, which should be familiar to a lot of you guys. And he's really good when it comes to he writes stories from Bergen, which is like the second largest city in Norway. And his way of describing the city and the main character is really, it borders on the old noir genre that you read in the 50s and 60s. So these are 2 of those I could recommend. And well, you can take it from there.
Yeah, no, I love that. And we do have listeners from all over the world, so we could have a few Norwegian authors that may be able to, listeners, sorry, that may be able to read that book that you originally were going to recommend. So
yeah, that would be great, though. And if there are any listeners here from Germany or from the Netherlands, my books will be available there as well. And I'm always trying to highlight other authors from Norway, because there are, sometimes if you are, so to say, discovered or not, sometimes it's just coincidence. So I think it's with the writing community as a whole to try and lift each other up. I think both from writers and aspiring writers, that's something that we need to do, because the struggle is hard enough alone. So community-wise, I think we need to stand shoulder by shoulder.
Absolutely. And that's a great note to end it on, because we will be back next week with another amazing show. Look out on all our socials in the week, and please pick up a copy of Into the Dark as well, and enjoy reading a bit of crime fiction. But I'm going to say goodbye and do a little wave, and then I'll press this button and hopefully it'll end. So this is the bit where we wave.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.